Thanks so much for listening. Before getting into today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that I would love to add value to you, your organization, and those you serve through speaking, training, professional development, or coaching. Over the last year, I've been fortunate to work with those in higher education, pre-K-12, and more recently, the corporate space. To learn more, visit my website at cjleadership.com or send me an email at chris@cjleadership.com. I can't wait to hear from you, and now on to our episode. Welcome back, friends, to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. Hey, as always, I'm just so grateful that you take time out of your busy schedule to not only develop yourself as a leader, but more importantly, develop the organizations and the people that you serve. Today, I'm very excited for our guest, Dr. Chris Hobbs. He's a head of school at Indian Rocks Christian School in Largo, Florida. Dr. Hobbs is a seasoned leader in Christian education with more than 2 decades of experience as a teacher, coach, student minister, principal, athletic director, and executive director in major metropolitan areas like Washington, D.C., New York City, West Palm Beach, and Houston. His passion for leadership and enthusiastic style has been recognized on the national level. He excels at rallying communities around a mission of biblical excellence and driving professional growth at Christian schools. A sought-after speaker, blogger, and podcast guest, Dr. Hobbs frequently presents his insights on leadership in educational, nonprofit, and corporate settings. He holds a bachelor's in physical education, a master's in sports coaching, a doctorate in educational leadership, and is an ordained minister. He has completed a leadership program at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Business, was a fellow for Baylor's Center for School Leadership, and is an expert in biblical worldview as a fellow at the Colson Center. So Dr. Chris Hobbs, thank you so much for joining us today. Really pleased to have you on the show. How are you doing, and how are things in Florida?
Great. Florida is the premier place in the country to live, in my opinion. The weather's incredible. The people are awesome. And it's always good to connect with another Chris. And
Yeah.
so thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Well, just so our listeners know, I recently had the opportunity to present at Schools United Professional Development. And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the largest professional development event for private Christian educators in the K-12 space. And it was in Fort Lauderdale. It was a wonderful event, great breakouts. And, I met Dr. Hobbs there officially. I'd been aware of him. If you do not follow him on social media, great follow. He posts almost daily. He writes on LinkedIn, has wonderful, wonderful leadership tips. Please follow him. Dr. Hobbs, there's so much that you have done. I mean, I was reading your bio. It doesn't say that you drove the bus, but I wouldn't be surprised if at one time you did drive the bus.
It's licensed for 17 years. So yeah.
Okay. What, I guess for our listeners that might not be too familiar with maybe private schools in general or your background, I always like to ask our guests, just give us a little overview of who Dr. Chris Hobbs is and what led you to your current position now, which is head of school. I think in some context that might be maybe a superintendent, the equivalent thereof, and just a little bit about your journey and maybe what you'd like us to know about your current position.
Yeah. So I am the product of Christian education. My father just retired after 48 years leading in Christian schools. My mother retired with him after about 30 years of working in Christian schools. And so me and my 2 brothers were raised in those atmospheres. It's all we know. And so I hope I'm half decent at it because I literally don't know how to do anything else. And then after just a wonderful K-12 experience at a church-run Christian school that was thriving, had great energy, great synergy, but it was small. And so I got an opportunity as a teenager to just do a lot of things and to be mentored by adults that did a lot of things. They held a lot of different roles. It just creates just robust opportunities for you to kind of practice everything and be open to everything. And so after I got to play college basketball at a small little Christian college in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Baptist Bible College, and had an incredible coach that had a huge impact in my life. Like I said, it was just D3 ball, but it felt like I might as well have been at Kentucky or Duke for me. I was there to play basketball, and then senior year, I decided better finish up this degree and go live a real life. And so, me and my wife, fiance at the time, we got married right after college, and we dove right back into Christian school. She was my high school sweetheart, so she was raised at the same place I was, and just jumped in, wearing a bunch of hats. I was a phys ed teacher and a coach. Diverted for a year or two into student ministry. I was a student pastor, and then went into being a dean of students and then middle school principal. And then my life, my first 17 or 18 years, really did always cycle around the athletic experience that students were having at schools. And so I loved coaching, loved my players, loved their families, and then that evolved into athletic department leadership. Had a great run as an athletic director in New Jersey and in West Palm. And got some national recognition because I just had an athletic department full of studs, just incredible people. And so, I ended up being on the tip of that spear. And so that was a really fun experience. Went out to Houston, was part of an executive team. That's when I branched out of just athletic administration and into overall school leadership. Had a wonderful couple of years out there in Houston, and that has now landed. I think ultimately what was always going to be the evolution into the head seat at a school, just because of who I was, my father, who he was. There was always, I've been at 5 institutions in 25 years. Never really imagined myself that I'd be at 5. I was raised K to 12 at the same place, and so the longevity was part of my DNA, but God just seemed to open doors and kind of nudge me through them on this step to what I think now is a pretty long-term spot for me as the head of school here at Indian Rocks Christian School. And so along the way, earned degrees because that's how you validate your leadership, so you can help your growing family, and got a real taste for professional development, and so was very ambitious in those areas. And here we sit, and it's been I'm about to cross 1 year at Indian Rocks, and this has been a perfect institution for me. I hope I'm as good to them as they've been to me.
And what can you tell us a little bit about the makeup of your district in terms of maybe the size? I mean, I assume
Yep,
it's
yep.
a K-12, but people aren't familiar with that. What would you like them to know?
Yep, yeah. So we are a ministry of Indian Rocks Church here in Largo, Florida. Largo sits right between Clearwater to the north and St. Petersburg to the south. So it's like 3 major like gathering centers for people. Those 3 areas, and Pinellas County is where we're located. It's the most densely populated county in the state of Florida. About 1 million people on this tiny little peninsula county. It's a beautiful county. You're never more than 7 miles from the beach in this county, and so it is everything that's great about life on the Florida coast. Indian Rocks Christian School is the largest K-12 on the west coast of Florida, so we've got about 1,200 kids here. We will be opening a new campus next year to service preschool and elementary students, and we continue to really thrive here on the original campus in Largo as well. And so about 130 employees inside of the school at the moment. And that number is growing almost by semester as we are meeting the needs of all the students that are coming our direction. It is very similar to the atmosphere I was raised in, just more. It was not as big as this that I was raised in, but it feels very similar. The rhythms are similar, the relationships, the sacred cows, all those things are very, very familiar to me.
Well, I appreciate that. One thing that I'll share with the listeners is the day before the conference, there was kind of a leadership day that I attended. We did some mini breakout sessions, and one thing that I noticed about Dr. Hobbs, and this says a lot about his leadership, is one of his principals, I believe it was Mrs. Vogel, was not only doing a presentation that I attended, and it was great. I need to get her on the podcast as well. But honestly, and not to embarrass you, Dr. Hobbs, but he was standing there. He was her biggest cheerleader. He was supporting her, and that says a lot about somebody as a leader. They weren't necessarily in their school setting, but that was one of his teammates. And again, I could tell based upon what she was sharing that there's great things going on in your school. And so kudos to you and your team already. I guess a couple things that really stick out to me, and you shared some great things about your leadership journey and your leadership strengths. You talked about your diverse background in major metropolitan areas, being a teacher, coach, minister, administrator. You said multiple campuses over your career. What has that taught you about leadership, and how has that helped you really refine your current leadership style now, having served at different places across the country?
The advantage of some of those spots is I probably got, they were probably just, particularly early in my career, they were a
Mm-hmm.
little bit smaller. The resources were a little bit tight. And so I probably got opportunities to lead much earlier than you normally would. And if you can keep your wits about you and you can do it really for the betterment of other people, they'll keep letting you do it, even while you're clumsy about it, and you're stubbing your toe on things. But like I said, if you're a good teammate and you're really in it for the welfare of the people around you, you'll be able to fail fast. And so that's the blessing of those places. So for leaders that are in smaller districts and smaller school settings, there's real advantages to that, because you'll get to try some things and do some things that larger places just quite honestly don't have the tolerance for, quite honestly. And so that was those were special times, as I just learned fast. I had a lot of zeal for it, as modeled for me by my father. And I had a taste for like getting better. Like I just wanted to be, I just wanted to be good at what I did, so that people had confidence that what they were receiving was of quality. And so put that all together, and next thing you know, you've accumulated quite a bit of experiences, and yet you have a sense, you have like a spidey sense about how things should go and when things are off and why they're off and all this kind of stuff. You start to develop pretty good instincts after all that. It helps being raised in it too, and you just have no idea sitting at the dinner table, the leadership tips you're inadvertently picking up as a 12-year-old, just listening to your dad, talk about his day and stuff like that. My grandfather was a church pastor, was a senior pastor, so he led in his congregation, his context. So it was just very normal for me to be around men that led. And I think that's why I say like the inevitability of me doing what I'm doing now in this role is really more a credit to like the men I was around. It's not really me, it's the men I was around and their influence on me. And so my college basketball coach was just a tremendous leader, very, very passionate. And so that was modeled for me. And so a credit to those men, the opportunities at smaller institutions to try things, and people gave me a chance to get better at it because I wasn't good at first at it. And then it's ultimately landed here in the current role that I have.
So you shared that your Clifton strengths are learner and positivity, and working genius identifies as galvanizing enablement. Clear that you are a wonderful communicator. And so I'd like, based upon that, Chris, is can you talk to us, and whether it's seasoned leaders that might be able to benefit, or and as you know, especially in education, if you work with kids, you're a leader. So, everyone's a leader. But if you're looking at, going into a formalized role, certainly in your current position, but going back to when you were a coach, when you were an AD, a classroom teacher, how do you go about establishing a positive culture, establishing clarity on mission, core values, developing those relationships, obviously communicating, and just creating that space where everyone's pulling in the right direction and doing so in a way that adheres to your core values and who you want to be as a culture?
Yeah, yeah. I think you've got to do a great job leading yourself, first and foremost. And so that's no matter what you're leading, if you're going to lead well, first starting with yourself and then out into your classroom with your students or your department or your division or a building or a district, you've got to lead yourself. And in order to do that and lead in any capacity, you got to spend time thinking about like, why am I doing this? What matters to me? What am I passionate about? Because the work's really got to matter to you. And then, the people really got to matter to you. And so For whatever reason, I've again, it's probably the credit to the men that have been in my life as I was, in my formative years. I guess I heard a lot of questions or a lot of conversations reflecting on those things. Thinking is hard, which is why few people do it. And so leaders got to think, right? And the first thing you got to think about is like, what is this all about? Why am I doing this? What really matters in the work that we're doing? And so once you train yourself to think about that, it starts to get a little bit easier to think about it on behalf of a department or on behalf of a division or a building or an entire district. And then as you start to do that, you start to realize the importance of helping people have clarity on why we're doing what we're doing. And so, you would read a lot of like Patrick Lencioni would talk about this stuff, Maxwell would talk about this stuff, Gordon would talk about this stuff, Kutis and Postner would talk about this stuff, like all these great leadership thinkers and writers and speakers. But I think where it falls short sometimes is we just struggle to find the time to reflect on these things, these big existential things. But I have experienced, and in my leadership journey, I have found that it's those things that have kind of been able to not just set me apart as a leader, but help my groups really believe in what we're doing. They really value the fact that someone has taken the time to think about the why on all this stuff. And so, but it starts with like you personally, like why are you doing this, right? Like you've got to have a really strong sense of who you are, and that's where, Chris, you read some of those leadership profiles and those leadership assessments I shared with you. Like, hey, this is kind of who I am. I would challenge any leader to listen. Like, do you know that stuff about yourself? Do you know what those assessments say about you? You've got to take time to really understand who you are as a leader. There's certain like communication, like every leader has to communicate, right? Like that's not personality driven, that's not assessment driven, but how you go about it will be driven by your understanding of who you are. And those assessments are just one way that you can really understand who you are. And so that would just be kind of like from like if you're thinking concentric circles that build out to like how do you communicate existential things to an entire institution? Well, you got to start with yourself, right? And you got to understand those things about yourself and then practice them with a small team and then a bigger team. And then now you have a framework for stepping into a large role where it's not like coaching, right? Like, with 130 employees in my little Christian school here, I don't get to coach every single one of them. But there is like really big things that I'm responsible for on behalf of the institution that helps them make sense of why they're doing what they're doing.
I'm glad, Chris, that you mentioned some of the authors that have been influential. My listeners know that I'm a big John Maxwell fan for many reasons. And if you don't know, John Maxwell started years ago as a preacher in small town Midwestern church, I think in Indiana, I believe. And for those of you that are Christian, you'll recognize in a lot of his works that there's definitely a connection, and I think it's very supportive. You mentioned in the bio about rallying communities around a mission of biblical excellence, and so I am curious, and for our listeners, regardless of their background, how have you in your leadership role and how you interact with others, and you've been very successful. To what extent has your faith and your ability to draw upon that and even read more non-secularly, I guess, into that? I guess talk about how that has helped shape you and obviously mold you into a very effective school leader.
Yeah. So, God's word's clear that He has created all of us and all of this, and He's created each one of us with purpose in an intimate way, And so, part of that creative order is He created us to do good work. We see that stated in the book of Matthew. We say it's stated in the book of Ephesians, even in the book of Genesis, when God describes, the creative origins of the world. He created an incredible world, and then He created humankind, and He gave the world to humankind and said, "Hey, this is awesome. Now go make it even better." And so that's really what unfolds in what they call the Cultural Commission in Genesis 1 and 2. And so it's in our DNA to do great work that really satisfies us because of the quality of it. And so that's kind of the starting point for me in like the pursuit of excellence. And then if you look at some of the Old Testament characters, if you understand anything about the Bible a little bit, there's seasons, historical accounts in the Bible when the Israelites are taken in exile by the dominant nation, really in the entire world at the time, the Babylonian Empire, and these Israel nationals are taken in exile over to Babylon, and yet they thrive. They're captives, they're in exile in a foreign country, and yet they thrive and they attain the highest levels of influence in that world. And how did they thrive? Well, they thrived because they were really good at what they did. The biblical character of Daniel. Probably lots of people are familiar with Daniel in the lion's den. Well, I mean, Daniel was the premier counselor to the emperor, who was the most powerful man on the planet. Well, how did he get there as an immigrant exile in that country? He got there because he was really good at what he did. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Nehemiah, Esther, all these biblical historical figures really, really made significant impact on a foreign culture. And they did it through their excellence. Their faith in God was the foundation for it, but their pragmatic skills was the vehicle. And so, I mean, I could talk about that stuff for a long time, but Tim Keller, many people would probably recognize Tim Keller's name. Tim Keller's written about this in his book, Every Good Endeavor. He calls it the ministry of competence. I think it's a big part of my testimony for the Lord to the world to do really, really good work. And I try and really help people be excited about that, right? Like, I don't want it to be a burden that we have to carry. I want it to be like a really, really exciting thing we're pursuing. Jordan Peterson, who dabbles in faith. I don't think he and I align theologically on things, but Jordan Peterson is an incredible thinker. I've read quite a bit of his stuff, listened to a ton of his podcasts, and he talks about the critical feature of upward aim in our lives, right? Like, we're miserable when we're not aiming at something of value and of importance, and that can be leading your family. That can be doing a great job as a 20-year-old fast food worker, working your way through college. That can be as an elementary educator. It can be as a carpenter, but life is more fulfilling when we're aiming towards our best efforts. And so Peterson talks about, he uses the example of going to watch a hockey game. He's a Toronto native, and how it's impossible to get Maple Leaf tickets, and these stadiums will pack out to watch people aim at a target, right? And like people lose their minds when you aim at the target and you hit the target, being like scoring a goal in hockey. And he thinks it's like one of those existential evidences, those breadcrumbs to who we are as humans. And I think he's right. I think he's right for more reasons than he knows, And so all those things, you can probably tell I've thought about this a little bit more than the average bear, but I try and get people really excited about the things I think are already in their DNA.
And again, what just seeing you around your colleagues and some of your faculty, that is so true. And I love what you shared is do great work. And in the bigger picture, I always, the reason that I work in higher ed, I used to be in K-12, but the reason that I have people from all over, even outside education on here is I think we owe it to ourselves and the people we serve to be open-minded enough. We can learn from everyone. Like you said, you might not align 100% with somebody, but we all have value. We all have something to add. And I would just encourage people to, whatever it means for you, maybe learn from a source or a person that at first sight or thought like, oh, I normally wouldn't read or listen to that. Maybe pick up that book that you normally wouldn't have read, or maybe you wouldn't have thought to read a book written by an economist, or I'm just making that up. But I really appreciate that, because you also touched on, not only do great things, but the power of influence and wherever you're at doing those things. And that also brings me into another topic that I always like to ask leaders, because, I think, especially in education, and you have these folks, you have some people that, while I'm sure they would be great moving into administration, they are probably best called to stay in the classroom and teach kids. And then there are others that might be scared to leave the classroom, but if they're being honest, they should maybe go into being an assistant principal, et cetera. And a lot of times, what gets people maybe a little hesitant is the thought of conflict, the thought of those things that when we were the teacher, we looked at someone like Dr. Hobbs and said, "Oh, you couldn't pay me pay me enough to do that." And I say this somewhat in jest, but there might be listeners that might, from a distance, think, "Well, Dr. Hobbs works at a Christian school. You know, Christians are good people. They make good decisions. They treat each other well." Now, I've also read that one of the hardest jobs in leadership is being a pastor. So I think there's some it's a middle ground there. But I assume it's ignorant for me to think that just because you're at a Christian school, everyone makes great choices, everyone gets along, and no one gets sent to the principal's office. Assuming, since we're all people and we make mistakes, no one's perfect. I guess, what are your thoughts or advice on how do you handle conflict, and what might you say to that leader that if that's the only thing holding them back from pursuing formalized roles, what might your advice be?
Great. I would say, Chris, first of all, in the Christian education context, you're going to invite some conflict when you mess with people's money, when you mess with their kids, and when you mess with their faith. And we do all three in a Christian school. And so you're gonna invite some interesting conversations, and you're gonna invite some real passionate interactions. And you are right. We are all people. I do believe that not to get too theological, I do believe we're all sin-natured people in need of a savior, and so that comes with a lot of complexity for us all. And so I would say, in the term of conflict, for a leader, first of all, you want to discern between conflict and criticism. Michael Lindsay, who's the president at Taylor University, he was the president at Gordon College previous to that. He's written two wonderful books that I'd encourage any leader in an educational setting to read. The first one is View from the Top, and the second one is Hinge Moments. Both of those books are easy to read, very, very encouraging, very inspiring, and very insightful on managing different leadership dynamics. And Michael Lindsay recently was quoted as saying that leaders can never forget that they carry the collective complaints of the organization. Therefore, it's important to know when not to act. And I would say that that's one of the things I'm learning in my first year is I almost every complaint about the organization lands here in my inbox or in a meeting. And it doesn't mean that anything's wrong. It's just the aggregate effect of being the place where most of those things land. We're a thriving institution. I mean, we're in a golden era as an institution, and so for leaders, conflict and criticism are two different things. And just measure the criticism appropriately, especially the larger your leadership role, the more that you're going to engage with it, and don't overreact to it. And so I think that's what President Lindsay of Taylor University was getting at. I mean, don't overreact to the criticism because the role you hold just naturally draws it. And then back to the conflict issue, I would just say that number one, tell the truth early. Truth, the longer you wait to tell the truth, the longer you wait to have a conversation that's going to have a little conflict to it, because you got to tell the truth to someone. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. So tell the truth early. This is a concept coming from Stephen Covey, Jr. In a lot of his writings on trust. He talks a lot about telling the truth early. And so I would say tell the truth early. Conflict is like fish. It doesn't get better with time. So just go ahead and have it. And so tell the truth early. I would also say when you're engaged in that conversation, when you're the one that has to initiate that conflicting conversation, that conversation of conflict, I would say this is a trick I learned from my friend Don Davis. Don's just a premier educational leader. You should have him on your podcast. One of my best friends for a very long time. Don, I learned this trick from Don. Really lower the volume of your voice. And so as you're going into a hard conversation, turn the volume of your voice down on purpose, almost to a whisper. That by in nature is going to help you navigate the conflict. It reminds you to keep your emotions in check. It allows hard information to be delivered literally softly from a volume standpoint, making it a touch more palatable. And so I would say engage with the truth early. Don't let it lie around. Have a soft voice on it. And then I would say be very, very confident because 99% of the hard conversations I've ever had, I got to the other side of them and I did not regret having them. In fact, I was very glad that I had them. I think so often we get to the other side or we're not, we forget that. We forget that if you engage in a hard conversation in a timely fashion and you do it in an appropriate manner, you're going to get to the other side of it and voila, you're now leading. That would be some encouragement to some folks that are like, oh man, conflict, conflict, conflict. I would say it's a really, really important thing to engage in. And 99% of the time you get on the other side of it and you're like, wow, I'm actually really glad I did that.
Just to recap is again, and people listening, you're going to want to take notes. You're going to want to pause and rewind. If you're driving, please pull over first. But what he says, tell truth early, lower the volume of your voice, and be confident. And I will also echo what Chris said. Is I also don't know that I can think of some really tough conversations that I've been a part of that on the other end you weren't glad you had them. Very similar to maybe a tough workout or, I mean, yes, it's uncomfortable and you might not look forward to it, but I don't think anyone has ever been upset that they came out the other end because if we're doing it for the right reasons, we're not being punitive. Most of us, I think, are being restorative, and it's just a way of addressing it. And thank you for sharing that. I again, it doesn't get easier necessarily, but I often say that the distance between, especially a new leader, and the type of the culture you have and the culture you want, or you can quantify it by how many difficult conversations are you willing to have. And I'm sure maybe even in the best of circumstances as a new leader, maybe you've even found that and have had to do some vision casting and things of that nature. Again, talking to Dr. Chris Hobbs here today, wonderful career Christian educator, leader, currently head of school at Indian Rocks Christian School in Largo, Florida. Touched on a lot of wonderful tidbits, some great nuggets of knowledge. Anyone that's listening in education wants to be a leader, wants to get better. I promise you'll benefit. I guess just as we kind of close out here, anything, I guess, first of all, I like to ask people, what are you currently doing? And you've given some great books and advice already. Anything else that you're currently doing or want to do from a professional development standpoint to help yourself as a leader that might benefit some of our listeners?
For those that are in the faith realm, I would strongly encourage the Colson Center and the Colson Fellows Program. I just completed that in 2024. It's a 10-month intensive program just around biblical worldview formation. Really enjoyed that. That's critical, I think, for those leading in a faith-based school environment. I would really encourage folks to do two things. Number one, have a regular reading habit. Read very, very regularly. In fact, I would encourage every single day. Read for at least 5 minutes. I've got a whole system by which, I go about my readings to really do that. I just haven't studied a leader of significance that wasn't a voracious reader. And so I would encourage everyone to do that. That's like unofficial professional development. And then official professional development, I would say about every year, maybe every other year, submit yourself to some form of a process by which you're being formally trained. And so let's say you're in the world of fundraising. There's something called a Certified Fundraising Executive, a CFRE designation. I would pursue that. That takes some time to do it. If you're in athletic administration, there's what's called the Certified Athletic Administrator status or the Certified Master Athletic Administrator status. Both of those take about a year to get through the NIAAA. Do that. There's principal certifications, there's fellows programs you can join. About every other year, you should be involved in that. If you're a school leader with robust educational degrees, and now you're leading in a significant capacity, I encourage you to consider like an MBA. Go learn about the business side of things, stuff like that. And we're just in such a wonderful time in the history of humankind that all of these things are accessible on your device, and so you don't have to work real hard to find something that you could jump into short-term, long-term, degrees, certifications, fellowships, all these things. And so read all the time, And about every other year, submit yourself to a formal learning experience.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's great advice. I encourage everyone, yeah, keep reading, get better. And I like that suggestion of every other year do something a little more formal. And you're right. There's so many ways, a lot of which are free or don't cost too much to learn online, to get a certificate, to engage in different types of professional learning, communities and networks. So again, well, Dr. Chris Hobbs, so thankful for you to take time. Really enjoyed this. I know it's going to add value to our leaders. And again, I'll put all the notes and for Dr. Hobbs, and or I'll put in the show notes. It looks like you have everything, Substack, and you have a blog, very active on the social media. I'll put the link to his school. I would follow him. Great stuff almost daily that he's putting out there that is free professional development. And if you're in any type of school leadership, certainly I think I know you'll benefit. So as we close out, I guess, Dr. Hobbs, any final thoughts or words you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so let me encourage everyone on this one. So often your leadership role as people on your team come to you, there's like this urge that you have to have the answers for everything. I would really encourage people to stiff arm that urge, and leaders really get comfortable asking the question to your people, what do you think? It's amazing the really important tidbits that you'll harvest up from your team. It's what I call collective wisdom. The tidbits you'll harvest up from your team if you're just regularly in the habit of asking them, what do you think? It's amazing how they'll buy in more freely to whatever decision you ultimately have to make as a leader. And it's amazing how your decisions will be better when you give your team some space to express to you what they're thinking about regarding whatever the current matter is at hand. And so that's something I've been working on hard in the last couple years. The broader you lead, the less you know, quite honestly, and so, when my elementary principal or my middle school principal or my dean of students or my communications director, my admissions director, when they come to me and we're discussing a matter, I try to really frequently say, what do you think? And so I encourage every leader to ask their team that question regularly.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Chris Hobbs, for wonderful leadership insight. I know everyone that's listening is gonna benefit from this, and more importantly, I encourage you to apply it and help your organization and those that you serve. So, again, thank you for joining us today on the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. To our listeners, always thankful that you take time to make us part of your professional development. I wish you well, and we will see you next time.